We have already talked on this course about writing from the perspective of the editors or writers in citizen journalism, but I am, for the purposes of this discussion at least, going to draw a bit of a line between those writers and the audience they speak to. Some might argue that line doesn't exist, that when readers become participants or sources of a story, they are as much writers as anyone else, or at least producers, people who use but also produce for the platforms. But if we think about those platforms, like Facebook pages or WordPress blogs, there is usually an originating owner, editor or administrator. Even if the site relies entirely on contributions, the editor may have say over what stays on the site and what's deleted, for example, if there's inappropriate trolling content from readers. So there's a power dynamic there. The media is mediated by a gatekeeper. So I do want this line there for this talk, partly, as I've said, because we've already talked about journalistic practice in previous resources on this course. I'll be looking at that from the perspective of how it's read, but I'll also be looking at the participatory practice, what the audience is doing. So how often do we consider what someone is doing when they comment in a story, click like or share it? It is usually a response to their initial reading of the story. Sometimes people will be responding to a mere Twitter headline without having even clicked through to the longer full page or blog post, especially where people are reticent to be drawn out of the Twitter timeline to the full diversion of the story, so they might retweet automatically without clicking through. This question of context is something I'm often interested in, the understanding that online media is typically read on a variety of hardware and software platforms these days, at any time of the day, at any interval. That context can affect the reading. How much time do I have for this article right now? Am I in the right mood for it? Have I got better things to be doing? How easy is it for me to type in the way that I'd like to, given where I am and what I'm using? Naomi Barron's book on mobile phones and language, called Always On: Language in an Online and Mobile World, looks at how people often use the long form of a phrase rather than contractions, simply because it's easier to do so rather than go through the phone's menu to select the apostrophe, depending of course on the phone interface. You might argue that iPhones are responsible for some of the worst typos. In other situations, people will be responding to other readers' comments rather than the article, and sometimes a conversation develops this way. But this can only happen if the platform easily shows and reveals that conversation so that people can become involved in it, and not all platforms do this. Another barrier is that readers will often take the writer as the expert and official source, but not assume the same respect should be given to other commenters, who would then be overlooked. In certain areas of citizen journalism, such as hyperlocal media, it could be argued that both writers and readers are experts in this particular field, their community. And the reason I'm interested in the ways we read is because it leads to how we digest and then respond. Over the remainder of this talk, I'd like to think about how we do that as readers and participants, what the participations mean as part of conversations in response to stories. So why do people comment online? First of all, note that I'm talking about commenting on blog, Facebook or Twitter posts, rather than the way we often more evenly talk in something like an online forum. I'm drawing that distinction I started with at the start between writer and reader, in effect a call and response. So first of all, the reason that someone comments is to respond. Maybe they have additional information to add context or corroborate the piece, maybe even as witnesses that add more to the bare bones of a Twitter post, for example. Or imagine a scenario whereby you see police activity in your neighbourhood, so you search on your local Facebook page to see if others have any info posted about it. If there are relevant messages, maybe you reply to them as an additional update to the situation. For example, the road is now clear, people can pass. Or maybe it gives your take on the situation, providing that balance of sources that we look for in journalistic standards. That scenario, and many similar, will come very naturally to people as ways of responding. If it's just a question of liking a story, many platforms now afford a way of expressing that with a click of a button, and yes, I'm thinking of Facebook. Many will do that, or may agree with someone else's sentiment, so could just as easily click someone else's comment to like it. But often they will repeat the sentiment by typing it again. In cases where someone dies, comment flows often show many people typing RIP, meaning rest in peace. So why are they doing this instead of liking the first person's comment? 2 reasons, I suspect. Where the first person's comment is something that visibly appears part of the conversation, a click of a like doesn't. It's lost in the numbers, so whether it's a subconscious move or not, I expect some people write their own similar comments to make them at least equal in the conversation, which earns them social capital in that situation. They are seen to care at least as much as anyone else in the situation. Secondly, my ethnographic work, looking at hyperlocal media audiences, demonstrates that readers don't always read comments. Like a horse with blinkers, they tend to focus on what's in front of them. This is especially true where comments are collapsed or will take some digging through to read them all. So they may be offering their rest in peace without seeing that others have done so before. This, of course, presents a problem. If the design of certain platforms don't allow real conversations to take place, it doesn't do much for the public sphere ideal that such spaces can be used to form collective public opinion. Sometimes flows of comments are very easy to pick apart as readers. They flow vertically. Readers can reply to conversations and start their own threads within a thread. Other sites, such as Reddit, have systems that allow readers to up or downvote comments to decide the hierarchy of the best comments based on them being functional, funny, witty, or sometimes because they reflect public opinion, or at least the opinion of that particular upvoter. Facebook pages as community media platforms can present a problem of dual conversations. Readers often provide the source of a story by posting to the post-to-page space, and then the editors of said page can repost it, but the original and the reposted contain 2 separate strands of conversation. So a reader reading one part might be missing out on key information in the other part. And then there's also the problem of comments that don't always necessarily flow in the order they've been posted, when we can't guarantee that Facebook remain consistent with how such information is displayed. But the reason people keep coming to Facebook, despite some of these quirks, is that it has become such an integral part of their everyday lives. And it's when we look at the specific language people use that we see that demonstrated. First of all, is bad grammar on Facebook a problem? Whilst I'll admit I do roll my eyes at poor spelling or repeated mistakes, scholars, like Naomi Barron again, suggest that what we might call relaxed or loose language part of a whatever attitude, where this is seen as acceptable and the norm on Facebook. It's not to say those people would use the same language in all other contexts, but instead demonstrates how we often adjust our ways of speaking and typing based on the situation. When language on Facebook uses odd contractions, numbers and other shortened words, consider how much that does or doesn't look like the way people might be texting or using instant messenger, for example. It all evolves together as part of an online lexicon for micro forms of text speech, often as turn-based snippets. And then imagine that those people are often likely to be using a phone's keyboard interface and might be in a hurry. Again, it's that whatever attitude. If I can type fast and basically get the message across, that's good enough for me. And I can't help understanding from these forms of writing that they are in fact language, ways of speaking, as Naomi Barron argues. And they show how easily we use these very public forums as part of our everyday lives to organise our social lives, to recommend local tradesmen, to inquire after each other, for example. Then, in addition to language online just being faster or more efficient to type in certain ways, we can also look for dialect. In my study of localised community media, I can often hear the Birmingham accents and paraphrasing coming through in the ways people have typed, the rhythms and the words they use. And in a similar way, it shows how familiar and easy we are with the platforms we use, but also their potential to let us express who we are, where we come from, and develop a sense of communal pride in our neighbourhoods. For example, the Ashmer Park estate in Wolverhampton is often typed as ASHMA because that's exactly how it's spoken locally, even though it's actually spelled ASHMORE. An outsider wouldn't understand what that same word meant in a tweet or a blog, so it has the effect of drawing locals together. Similarly, if we look at something like Reddit, the locality is the weird and wonderful world of Reddit itself, with its various memes and ways of communicating through its own dictionary. Again, once you spend long enough there, you pick those phrases up and can start applying them yourself. As well as words, it's also worth us talking about the various other ways people can communicate through citizen journalism. Photos can be used as parts of main stories, but also in responses. Again, they may either literally present another angle on the narrative to expose what happened later on in the scenario, or to show the backstage of something that might be argued as being staged. Sometimes, even in very banal stories like extreme weather, and maybe because they are banal and can be easily captured by everyone with a camera phone, one post will encourage others to share theirs in the same space, not necessarily to outdo the previous one, but to give their narrative on at least an equal footing. Again, this creates a sense of people sharing in space. The creation, framing and professionalism of such reader photos are rarely considered at length during these discussions. Photography is usually rather treated as a way of capturing the reader's view of the world they inhabit. One measure of quality in these instances isn't about how well the photo is lit or the type of filter used, but whether it captures a moment serving that purpose and how we read this. There is probably even something to be said for such amateur qualities being more authentic to viewers. In some cases where they may have lost a pet, for example, they need to make do with any photos they have at their disposal. In instances where there is a specific agenda, for example to invite people to an event, the design of images and photography is more likely to be considered, with at least the intention of giving all the necessary information, even if the design itself is a little homegrown. In other, maybe rarer cases, readers will capture video, sometimes because the subject matter lends itself to movement, a scene that is unfolding, such as an arrest or the aftermath of an accident, or because it's a guaranteed way to get at least one still picture that records the moment. Again, referring to weather, I've seen people shoot video of storms to then extract the still of the actual lightning strike. So, when your readers are commenting, or you hold conversations with them, consider some of the elements I've been discussing. Where are they? What's their mindset? Have they come back from a rough day at work, and this is them unwinding, in maybe more aggressive ways than they would if they were having the same discussion in a bar? Is the language they use to do with the fact they're used to typing with a phone, or because they actually are on a phone, and that shortening or use of numbers instead of words is just easier for them? Does the photography they use reflect that they are actually at the location of the story, reporting as a source for you? If we consider these kinds of questions and the various ways people interact within citizen journalism spaces, we will have better understanding of those things they say and the way in which they say them.